Good. It looks like we're up and running. Well, hello everybody. It's Monday Night Live.
Yes, it is. The best night of the week.
Lovely Kate Semmens, Dean Nixon. Excited to join you in our 4 different venues. We finally got it figured out. It was a Facebook issue.
Yeah, Facebook is just, they are tricky when it comes to lives.
All these little formats they want us to venture into, and it was causing problems. But we're excited to be back and on all of the different venues that we're on. So super excited. So welcome everybody. We are getting into the weather.
The St. George weather update.
We won't do the weather update today. So today
Sunshine, by the way.
It is. You can look over the shoulder.
Right there. Sunshine and blue skies.
There it is. Weather report regardless. So we're excited to jump into tonight's topic and talk a little bit about getting unstuck. Mm-hmm. This seems to be kind of a constant issue, especially, coming up with summer. We start to head into the summertime. It's the time that we all kind of want to hit the cruise control.
Oh, so much cruise.
And to just chill. And sometimes that's hard when we get into that, want to hold the space we're in, want to stay in the space we're in, and then just staying kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm. In as we're always trying to come at you guys with different ways to progress and grow and move forward. Yeah, oftentimes that, hey, I'm just good right here. Stuckedness.
Yes.
Really starts to sink in.
And it is interesting. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier as we were really prepping for the live was talking about how oftentimes we struggle with the justification or getting into the justification of why we're stuck or why we're stuck in those situations. And a lot of times it's justifications that we use.
Absolutely. And we talk about some of these concepts in depth in our in the whole seminar process, but it gets introduced into in the level 1 awakening seminar. And by the way, we've got one coming up in a couple weeks, so if you're looking forward to not staying stuck this summer and catapulting yourself forward in progress and growth, give us a call, 652-1202. Sydney can totally give you all the deets. 435. And really, I think oftentimes that justification piece comes from our comfort zones, right?
Right.
I'm feeling nice and cozy right here. I'm just gonna lather on some suntan oil and just chill right here and get a good tan, right? Instead of really kind of pushing ourselves out there into the growth zone and becoming more.
So finding out how you're stuck is really the big piece, and what area that you feel you're stuck in. And sometimes it's usually where I hear it the most is in our ability to really move forward in relationships.
Yes.
And we get into these relationship, for lack of better terms, ruts, where we do things the same way over and over and over, and we kind of fall into that insanity concept of that we do the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result every time, and we call that the insanity cycle. And a lot of times in relationships, we get stuck in that rut of doing the same things over and over and over. And I see a lot of times when couples are coming in and we're doing some of the couple coaching, it's really interesting to me how stuck in the behaviors or the beliefs that we can become so much that even though we're wanting to move forward, even though we're telling ourselves we want to move forward, even though we're saying, hey, I want to be different, or I want our relationship to feel different or look different, we keep going back to those areas that hold us hostage or keep us stuck.
Absolutely. And I think too, even a little tiny different shift of perspective there is oftentimes I think in relationship, we just want it to work. We just want it to be good. We want it to be good times. And I don't know, sometimes I'm not we really just need to progress and grow in this relationship, right? I just want it to feel good. And when it feels good is when I'm okay, stay in that sweet spot.
Okay.
And then that's when sometimes we can get off kilter in relationship, in a partnership, because then one person still continues to go forward and the other one's wait a minute, I like what was happening back there. It was real easy, right? We're always looking for it to get real easy and nice, and that's not real life, though.
Definitely not real life. Because it is, and that is one of the things that we see. And a lot of times with partners and people coming in and working on themselves, it's because the partnership or the relationship or the friendship or the family dynamic, whether it be child-parent, parent-child, or even in some cases, recently it's been employee-employer issues that I've had coming in. And it's this concept of how to move us forward. But we tend to go back to these old behaviors. We tend to go back to these old belief systems. And one of the biggest things that we struggle with is that feeling of vulnerability and that feeling of allowing myself to be open and to be teachable or open to what needs to shift or change. So a lot of times in relationships, one person tends to be working a little bit harder than the other, waiting for the other individual to catch up. But in reality, sometimes that they think they're the ones that are working the hardest in the relationship, but they actually may be stuck too.
Right. In their behavior patterns and things that aren't necessarily the most healthy either.
Right.
And I love how we say that, right? It's not wrong or right. It's either working or not working, or it's healthy or it's not healthy, right? It's not like, oh, you're a bad person because you always do that. Like that's not real life either. And I think part of the conversation that we were having before we jumped into here is like, what are some of those like signs that you could look for in yourself? Obviously, don't start pointing these out to your relationships because you probably aren't going to get a very good response.
If you want to stay really stuck, just say, hey, you're doing this wrong.
Yeah, that's not a great idea. But like, part of that, maybe one of those, I always call them little red flags, like the things that get waved or things that you can trip over, are when we start to make excuses for our behavior. Right. Saying statements like, oh, that's just the way that I am, or I've always been that way, or I was really taught that this should be the way. And I love how you just brought up that idea of the need to be open, right? And so really when you feel yourself closing in and being like, nope, that's probably a pretty good indicator that you're stuck in a rut somewhere, that you're like falling into that layer that we're talking about right now.
And usually where it breaks us down and where we struggle the most is in relationships is the communication piece. And we've talked so many times about the communication being an issue. We've got all these other videos you can go back in through the archives, either in the YouTube or in the Facebook, and you can find these areas that we've talked about how to communicate and where to communicate. But again, it's that feeling stuck oftentimes comes from wanting to feel comfortable, wanting to feel safe, or not wanting to feel wrong or feel bad. So we get stuck in those old behaviors, and we get stuck in our way of thinking that we have to salvage this, or we have to stay in this way, or we have to stay where we are, and we're not moving ourselves forward. Either emotionally we're not moving ourselves forward, mentally, spiritually, socially, all the 6 areas that we're always talking about. Financially, I think I mentioned that twice now, socially, etc. So in those areas, we have to really step back and ask ourselves, okay, am I feeling stuck? If so, where am I feeling stuck? Then we get into that concept of, is this a personality piece? And I know we talked a little bit about the difference between nature versus nurture. And there are certain types of personalities that tend to be a little bit more introverted, tend to be a little bit more internalized, which are 2 different things, by the way. Internalized and introverted, and some that may be externalized or extrovert, or maybe you're a internalized extrovert or an internalizer introvert. I think I said that correctly or backwards, but wherever you figure yourself out. So those personality traits that really fit in there can be a factor in this, because a lot of times we may go right back to an old behavior that comes to be, that is a part of our personality that makes things fall into those traps or fall into those things. So if I'm very, very internalized and I'm introverted, then I really need to work on my communication skills. I really need to do that. And if I'm very externalized and extroverted, I may need to learn how to listen better.
Right.
And I may need to learn how to shift. So that's the nature part.
Right.
But then there's the nurture part.
Right, which is what we're talking about, how you can be proactive at developing yourself and overcoming those places that we get stuck, right? So instead of just excusing it on, well, it's just the way I am, right? Like, it's just in my personality. It's part of my nature, which is true. That is a true statement. However, it's also very true that you're resilient and you're powerful and you can create whatever it is that you want to create. And so if you want to be a better listener and you have the tendency to be more of the gabber, right? Like you're way better at just talking than listening, then you can develop that skill of becoming a better listener.
Correct. Through
practice and through awareness and really, really working at it. And then lo and behold, eventually your listening strength muscle is going to be just as strong as your talking strength muscle, right?
Exactly. And as we talk through those pieces, there's another thing to add to it is there's really good information out there on the nurture part. And some of the things that you can look into, one of my favorites is one that is the birth order book.
Oh, yes.
By Dr. Lehman. And we can really look at how the birth order really impacts us on a nurture level. So I may come into the world with a certain type of personality, but then there's also going to be the influence of how I came into the world with my family dynamics.
Right.
Oldest, middle, youngest. He talks all these different types of things. So really getting a book like that and really understanding something like birth order. The other one that we could look into is one of your favorites.
Yeah. Sitting right here.
The color code, right?
Yes.
Right? Sir Taylor Hartman. It's an old one. And we can get into that and really look at the different color codes, and we can look at the different personalities that we have. And again, now we're talking about nurture. We're talking about the ability to really nurture or shift or change, and grow that part of us that is so important to grow. And I think what we got to get away from is we got to get away from the fear of being wrong. We've got to get away from the need to always be right. And there are some people that it's that always that need to be right leads them into arguing or always having to have the last word or having to be understood or feeling misunderstood, or the fear of being wrong can fit into those things too, which also keeps us stuck because we're afraid to take these risks.
Right.
And ultimately that's where it leads us. We talk about it in the 4 Steps to Confidence book. We're always talking about the way to really move yourself forward is to start taking healthy risks.
Yes.
I mean, this is something we've been hammering on now for almost 2 years.
How do you guys feel with that hammer? Huh? How does it feel?
So it's about taking healthy risks regardless of what it is. And so we've got good reference material that I can lean into. I can read these good books. I can learn. I can come in and work with coaches or therapists or educators that can really teach me how to communicate better, how to listen better, and to really help me understand my personality and understand myself better.
Right. And what I love about all these different tools and references, and I mean, we can keep going all day as far as like personality development and figuring stuff out with you, Britt. Like there's tons of them. One that I know is like the one that has been leaned into the hardest here at Turning Leaf is the PAS.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Which has a really interesting layer to it of your beginning, and then where you kind of started to modify, and then how you choose to show up. So there's like those different layers to each of us. But what I find the most empowering about all of this, looping it back into this idea of getting stuck, right, in a rut. Shout out to my late bestie, Whitney Nixon. We used to call it when you're stuck in a rut, it's that you're really unwilling to change. And to change was one word, right? Like, and so I love that you keep bringing in this idea of you got to get out of the idea that you're wrong and that it's bad and that you always need to be right, because when we're unwilling to look at things and make shifts and make changes because we're stuck in that on that platform of like, no, I have to be right, then we're really unwilling to change and we're going to just stay there, right? So all of these different things that we've just kind of come at you with, different ways to assess yourself and how you interact with others, and like they have all sorts of things as your strengths and your weaknesses, right? So it's really easy to just kind of be like, yep, I'm a yellow, I'm kind of flighty, you can't really depend on me, right? Instead of looking at that and being like, okay, this is my tendency.
Right.
This is really easy for me to just naturally flow into that. And I don't want to be looked at as flighty or
right.
inconsistent or unreliable. And so instead of being like, sorry, I'm late again, just kind of inconsistent, like, I really want to work on that and be able to lean into those pieces and understand how powerful you are, and having a willingness to look at it in order to grow yourself and not look at it as like, oh man, that's one of my weaknesses, right? Like, I suck at that. Like, okay, cool. This is an area that I have in my life that I can really lean into and cultivate and grow and become better.
Right. It is important for us to look at that, and as we look at that, those tendencies to go, okay, well, it is who I am, it's how I'm built, and we can really see those.
Stop trying to change me. Like, I can just hear people, right? Like, in relationships.
It is.
Sorry.
And in relationships, we really can get into that rut where I fall into behaviors, I fall into patterns, and a lot of it can be even on a subconscious level, where I'm around relationships so much that I can tend to just kind of fall into that role. And in one of those ways, I always tell people, if you think you're just killing it in life, go to a family reunion or a family gathering, right? Because it's usually in those family reunions or family gatherings that we fall back into old models or old patterns of behavior. And that's where it's so intriguing to, what I think would be hilarious for people is, take your birth order book, read that, Dr. Lehman's book, take that book, read it, and then go to a family reunion and see how accurate those descriptions are. And the fun part about it is that it is, as you know, our mantra at Turning Leaf is, it's not about change, it's about growth.
Right.
And the more that we lean in and we start to take, some accountability for our lives, it's easy to fall into the victim mode. It's easy to fall into the martyr mode. It's easy to fall into the controller mode. It's easy to fall into the blamer mode. And it's easy to fall into all of these old, non-working, unhealthy, super attractive, comfortable, comfort zone behaviors that we can get stuck in. Or we can take that healthy risk to educate ourselves, to read the books, to come in and get coaching, to do the things that we need to do to move ourselves forward. One of the biggest excuses, and I want to hit this before we get off, the run out of time, is one of the biggest excuses is, well, it's other people's fault. Well, I don't want to move forward if they're not going to do anything. I'm not going to change if they're not going to change. Why change if everything's going to stay the same at home? That's one that I see a lot. And years ago, working with kids, years ago, in the teen treatment programs, one of the biggest problems kids had and struggled with was that I'm going to do all this work, I'm going to grow in this facility, and then I'm going to go home and everything's going to be the same because my parents aren't going to change. My parents aren't going to do this work. My parents aren't trying to do these things. And these are the things that really start to struggle, and these are the things that really break down over time. And so that's where we have to work very, very hard to overcome that concept and to overcome that piece, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And say, okay, you know what? I'm going to move forward regardless. Because we do wait for the other person in our relationships. We wait. We just sit back and we wait, and we don't step forward because, well, I'm going to wait until you do something first.
Right.
Then I'll move forward.
Yes.
And then that becomes a big issue.
Well, and I think, too, another layer to that is when you really couple in some pretty interesting layers of codependency, then it's very scary to think of moving forward in a relationship and leaving someone behind and losing that someone.
That's
right?
a good
Like
point.
As you move forward, not knowing if they're going to be willing to love you in your new version and needing them to love you. Like, there's lots of layers, and I love that you brought that up because that is absolutely powerful. So potentially that is another Monday Night Live discussion.
A whole other discussion. Well, we have run out of time, so we've got to let you go.
And Wi-Fi,
folks.
apparently.
Apparently Wi-Fi on Turning Leaf is turned off on the Turning
Facebook
Leaf
pages
feed.
have
So
just stopped.
we apologize. We'll try and get that rectified. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for liking and sharing our videos.
Yes.
Those of you that continue to follow and create the fan base, we appreciate you so much. Take this home, talk about it at the dinner table. Make sure this becomes something that you talk about, and read, educate yourselves.
We love you guys. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time on
Monday Night Live.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.